Darius Vallon crouched in front of the woman chained to the warehouse wall and smiled, the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it. He grabbed her jaw, forced her face up, and looked her in the eyes like she was something he'd already decided to throw away. "You think he's coming for you?" he said. "Kellen doesn't come for people. He replaces them." Then he let go, walked away, left her in the dark. Her name was Elena Voss, and the man who just called her disposable? He was Kellen Thorne's most trusted partner. Bosh, if this kind of story grips you, the kind where loyalty gets tested, betrayal cuts deep, and one woman's survival changes everything, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. You will not want to miss what comes next. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The first thing Elena noticed when she woke up that morning, the morning everything changed, was that her coffee had gone cold. That was the kind of detail that would have bothered her once. She was that kind of person. Precise, attentive, someone who noticed when things were even slightly off from what they were supposed to be. She'd built her entire professional reputation on exactly that quality. And for 3 years, it had served her well inside the steel and glass tower on Morrison Street, where Kellen Thorne ran his empire. She poured the cold coffee down the sink, made a fresh cup, and stood at her kitchen window watching the October rain stripe the glass. She had a 7:45 call to coordinate, a board packet to finalize before noon, and 3 separate meetings to reschedule because Kellen had decided to cancel his Thursday calendar without giving her any reason. That was also the kind of thing she'd gotten used to. He didn't explain himself. He didn't owe her explanations. Her job was to make the pieces fit regardless of what he moved. She was good at making pieces fit. By 8:30, she was at her desk on the 14th floor, headset on, working through a stack of correspondence that had backed up while she'd spent the previous afternoon on a call with Kellen's real estate attorneys. The office around her hummed with the low-level anxiety that always lived in places built on power. Assistants walking quickly, conversations kept just below the volume needed to be overheard, everyone performing calm while quietly calculating. Elena didn't perform anything. She actually was calm. That was rarer than people realized. At 9:10, Marcus Vale stopped by her desk. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Marcus was a company executive, one of the faces that appeared regularly in the orbit of Kellen's legitimate business holdings. He wore expensive clothes badly, which was a tell Elena had always noticed. He wanted people to see the money before they saw him. He had the particular energy of a man who was always about 3 steps into a plan he hadn't finished thinking through. "Elena," he set a folder on the edge of her desk. "I need you to pull together the documentation for the Harwick transfer. Kellen said he wants it moved through your office before close of business." She looked at the folder without picking it up. "Kellen didn't mention that to me." "He's in a meeting. I just came from there. I'll confirm when he's out." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "It's time-sensitive." "Everything is time-sensitive." She looked at him evenly. "I'll confirm when he's out." He picked the folder back up, smiled in the way that people smile when they're swallowing something they'd rather say out loud. "Fine. Check your encrypted messages. There may be a follow-up from his office. Just wanted to give you the heads up." "Appreciated," she said, and turned back to her screen. She thought nothing more of it. That was the thing about competent people. They stayed focused on what was in front of them, and Marcus Vale had always registered as background noise. Slightly unpleasant, easily managed. She didn't know, sitting there at her desk with her second cup of coffee still warm, that Marcus Vale had already set her up to disappear. The message came through at 6:47 that evening. Most of the office had cleared out by then. Kellen had been in back-to-back meetings since 3 and hadn't come up for air, which meant Elena was still at her desk with her shoes half off and a legal pad covered in notes she'd need to decode in the morning. She was the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes, the specific exhaustion of someone who had spent an entire day managing the invisible architecture that keeps a large organization from collapsing. The message was on the encrypted channel. It appeared to come from Kellen's internal system. It said there were documents, physical documents, that needed to be retrieved from a courier pickup point near the waterfront. It said it was time sensitive. It gave an address. She stared at the message for almost a minute. This was not how they typically did things. Kellen's operation had protocols, and physical pickups at off-site locations at 7 p.m. on a rainy Thursday were not part of those protocols. Elena knew every protocol. She had written half of them. But the message had come through the right channel. It had the right syntax. And she'd spent the entire day watching Kellen alter plans without explanation, so the idea that he'd set up something unusual without looping her in was, if not likely, at least not impossible. She almost called him. She reached for her phone, actually picked it up, his contact already on the screen. Then she thought about the fact that he was still in that meeting, that she'd already interrupted him twice that day for things that turned out to be manageable, and that she was, in the end, a professional who had handled far stranger requests than this. She put her phone down, put her shoes back on, grabbed her bag and her umbrella. She would think about that moment for a very long time afterward, the moment she put her phone down. The address led her to a block near the river where the streetlights were spaced too far apart. She found the building, a squat, nondescript structure that had once been some kind of shipping office, now dark and apparently unused. There was a car parked outside with its lights off, which she registered as slightly odd, and a man standing near the entrance who she didn't recognize. "Elena Voss?" he said. "Yes." "Come inside, the documents are in the back." Every instinct she had fired at once. The animal part of her brain, the part that doesn't care about professional protocols or politeness, sent up a signal that was unmistakably a warning. She stopped walking. "Can you bring them out?" she said. The man looked at her. Then someone grabbed her from behind. The umbrella hit the ground. She fought. She was not a passive person, and she was not small, and for a few seconds she made it genuinely difficult for them, which she would later hold on to as the one thing that had not been taken from her in those first few moments. But there were two of them, and then a third, and the darkness came up over her fast. She woke up to chains. Not metaphorical ones. Actual chains. A cuff around her left wrist attached to a length of industrial chain attached to a structural pillar. She was sitting on a concrete floor. There was a single work light somewhere above her, and the smell of the place, oil and rust and the particular staleness of somewhere that had been sealed too long, told her she was in some kind of warehouse. Her shoes were gone. Her bag was gone. Her phone was gone. She sat very still and did a systematic check of her body, the way she'd once read that you were supposed to. Nothing broken. Some bruising at her wrists and along her left side, her head aching from whatever they'd used to knock her out. She was cold. Her clothes were not enough for the temperature of wherever she was. She sat with all of this, let herself feel the weight of it, did not cry. Then she started thinking. Someone had done this deliberately, someone who knew who she was, who she worked for, and how to get her to walk out of a building alone after dark. The message had come through the encrypted channel, which meant either someone had access to that system or someone had cloned it convincingly enough to fool her. Someone inside Kellen's world. The door opened and Darius Valen walked in. She had met Darius many times. He was one of Kellen's most trusted partners, a man with a reputation for being reasonable, for being the voice in the room that smoothed things over when tensions ran high. He was in his mid-50s, with a carefully maintained appearance that suggested he cared deeply about being underestimated. She had always found him slightly too smooth, but she dismissed that as personal preference. She looked at him now and understood that she had not been wrong. She had simply been too polite to act on it. "Elena." He stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, and looked at her with something that was almost apologetic. Almost. "I want you to know this isn't personal." "Undo the chain," she said. "We need information." "I don't have any information." "Undo the chain." "You have more information than you realize. You've been beside Kellen for 3 years. His schedule, his meetings, his financial arrangements. I manage his calendar," she said flatly. "I don't have access to his financial arrangements. You have access to things you don't even know the value of." He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, and she had to resist the urge to pull back. "Documents you've handled, names you've heard, Account numbers that pass through your office on their way somewhere else. I don't know what you're talking about. You will, he said, when you've had time to think. He stood, straightened his coat. Someone will bring you water, he said, as if this were a courtesy that should impress her. We're not animals. You chained a woman to a wall, Elena said. That is the definition of what an animal does. His expression tightened. First real crack in the smooth surface. Get some rest, he said, and left. She sat in the dark and the cold and thought about what she'd seen in his eyes before he turned away. Not cruelty exactly, but something worse. Calculation. The look of a man working through numbers, and she was one of the numbers. 6 weeks. That was how long it lasted. She lost track of days quickly. There were no windows, the light never changed, and the only way to mark time was by when food appeared and when Darius or one of his people came to ask her the same questions she kept answering the same way. She knew nothing. She had access to nothing. She was a secretary, not a partner, not a confidant, not a vault. They didn't believe her. Darius came every few days. He was always controlled, always almost polite, always pressing the same points with slight variations as if he believed a different angle would eventually produce a different result. She began to understand that he was not stupid. He was certain. He had decided, based on whatever logic had brought him to this, that she was withholding, and certainty in the wrong direction was its own kind of dangerous. The others were less controlled. One of them, a younger man who came with the food and tried to use the isolation as leverage, told her that Kellen wasn't looking for her, that as far as her boss was concerned, she'd just quit, gone, moved on. She didn't believe him. She held on to not believing him with both hands in the dark. But weeks passed, and the floor stayed cold, and her wrist had a permanent mark from the chain. And believing something in the dark, when you can't see anything to confirm it, is harder than anyone who hasn't done it can understand. She started talking to herself, not because she'd lost her mind, but because the silence was the thing she fought the hardest. She went through every meeting she'd ever organized, every document she'd ever handled, every conversation she'd overheard or been part of, not to find the information Darius wanted. She genuinely didn't have it. But because keeping the details of her life organized in her head meant she still had a life. She still existed somewhere beyond these walls. She thought about Kellen more than she expected to, not in the way that fear produces fantasies of rescue. Not exactly. But she thought about the version of him she actually knew, the one that existed behind the version everyone else saw. The way he'd once told her quietly, after a particularly brutal week, that he didn't know what he'd do without her holding things together. The way he never said thank you in words, but made sure she had what she needed before she knew to ask. The way he looked at her sometimes like she was the only still thing in a room full of motion. She thought, if anyone was going to come, it would be him. She thought, but maybe they're right. Maybe no one is coming. Then the door opened. It wasn't Darius. The sound was wrong, too fast, too many footsteps. The kind of noise that a situation makes when it tips from control to something else entirely. She heard voices, not calm ones. Then the warehouse door at the far end blew open and light came through it, real light, from outside. And in the middle of that light, standing perfectly still while everything moved around him, was Kellen Thorne. She had seen him in every kind of situation, boardrooms, crisis meetings, the moments when everything went wrong and someone had to hold the room together. She had seen him cold, calculating, furious in that contained way of his where the temperature dropped instead of rose. She had never seen him like this. He was moving before anyone spoke, crossing the warehouse floor with a focus that wasn't anger exactly. It was something past anger, something that had burned through anger and come out the other side as pure, undecorated purpose. His eyes found her immediately, and for 1 second, just one, something crossed his face that she didn't have a word for. He crossed to her in 6 steps, crouched down. His hands went to the chain at her wrist, and he looked at it, and then he looked at her face, and his jaw was so tight she could see it in the low light. Don't, she said, because she could see him about to ask if she was all right, and she was not ready for that question. He didn't ask. He produced a key. Had he gotten it from one of the men outside? She didn't know. Didn't ask. He worked the lock on the cuff with the kind of focused precision she recognized as the thing he did when he was keeping himself from doing something else. And when the chain fell away, she felt the absence of its weight as something almost physical. She looked at her wrist, the mark, the raw skin. Elena. His voice was low, rough in a way she'd never heard before. I'm okay, she said. You're not. No, she admitted. I'm not, but I'm here. He stood and she tried to stand with him, and her legs didn't cooperate immediately. 6 weeks of limited movement. And he caught her arm, steadied her, didn't make a production of it. There were people around them, his people, she understood now. The footsteps, the noise, the way the warehouse had changed character in the last 2 minutes. She didn't focus on them. She focused on staying upright. Can you walk? He asked. Yes. She could. Barely. But yes. He stayed right beside her, not holding her up, not making her feel held up, just present, close enough that if she needed it, he was there. That was something she noticed. He understood the difference between support and control. When they reached the door and the real air hit her, cold, damp, smelling of rain and the river nearby, she stopped and just breathed it. Stood there breathing for a moment that felt both very short and very necessary. Kellen waited. He didn't rush her. Then he said, quiet enough that it was only for her, No one touches what belongs under my protection. She looked at him. The man Portland feared. The man who had never once, in 3 years, given her a reason to be afraid of him. How did you find me? She asked. That's a conversation for later. Darius, I know. Something moved in his face, fast, controlled, then gone. I know. She understood then, from the way he said it, from the precise, deliberate weight of those 2 words, that Darius Vallon had run out of time without knowing it. Come on, Kellen said. Let's get you out of here. She walked out of that warehouse on her own 2 feet. She made sure of it. The drive to his estate took 40 minutes. She slept for 38 of them, which she hadn't planned to do, which her body simply decided without asking her permission. She woke up as the car slowed and sat up straight and looked out the window at the lights of the house, and for a moment she couldn't locate herself in time or place. Then she remembered all of it, quickly, the way memories come back when your guard is down. Kellen was already out of the car. He opened her door himself, which he had never done in 3 years, and held it without saying anything. I can manage, she said. I know, he said. I'm holding the door. She got out. The doctors were already there, 2 of them, waiting in a room that had been prepared with the kind of thoroughness she recognized as Kellen's particular style. Everything that could be anticipated had been anticipated. She was examined, cleaned up, given clothes that fit, given food that was plain and warm, which was what she'd actually wanted and hadn't known how to ask for. At some point, sitting in a chair with a blanket around her shoulders and a bowl of soup she'd eaten half of, she realized her hands were shaking. Not from cold, from the particular adrenaline drop that happens when the danger is over and your body finally believes it. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed through it. Kellen came in later. He stood in the doorway and didn't come in unless she indicated he could, which was something she noted and filed without comment. How are you doing? He asked. Honestly? Always? I'm angry, she said. I've been angry for 6 weeks, and I kept it somewhere I could use it, and now that I'm out, I don't know what to do with it. He was quiet for a moment. That's probably the healthiest thing you've said since I found you. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. And Darius? His expression shifted. Careful. Controlled. The face he wore when he was making a decision he'd already made. Darius is my problem, he said. He said you weren't looking for me, Elena said. He said you didn't care. The silence that followed that sentence was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms around something significant. He was wrong, Kellen said finally. Simple, no embellishment. She nodded slowly, looked down at her hands, still. There's more to this than him, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Tell me. Not tonight. Kellen. Elena. He said her name the way he said very few things, directly, without softening, without performance. You've been gone for 6 weeks. You need sleep. The rest of it will wait until morning. She wanted to argue. She was good at arguing with him. It was arguably the most useful thing she did, the willingness to push back when everyone else stepped aside. But the truth was that her body had already decided the argument for her, because the warmth and the food and the absence of chains had caught up with her all at once, and she could feel herself fading at the edges. "We're going to talk about all of it tomorrow," she said. "Everything." "Yes," he said. "And you're not going to manage what I know." He looked at her for a moment. "No, I'm not." "Good." She pulled the blanket tighter. Outside, the rain was still coming down. She could hear it against the windows. And for the first time in 6 weeks, the sound of rain was just rain. Not a reminder of the last night she'd been free. Not a texture in the darkness of the warehouse. Just ordinary weather. She let herself close her eyes. In the morning, she would find out what Darius had really been after. In the morning, she would learn about Marcus Vale. In the morning, everything was going to get harder before it got better. She was experienced enough to know that escaping a thing was never the end of the thing. But tonight she was warm, and the chain was gone from her wrist, and Kellen Thorne had walked through a warehouse door to find her. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. She woke up at 4:43 in the morning and didn't know where she was for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of pure animal panic, hands gripping the sheets, eyes searching the dark for the work light that had been the only light she'd known for 6 weeks. Lungs pulling air in the shallow, controlled way she'd taught herself to breathe when she needed to stay quiet. Her body had learned things in that warehouse that her mind hadn't authorized, and those things didn't unlearn themselves overnight just because the floor was soft now, and the room smelled like clean linen instead of rust. Then she found the window. Rain on glass. A streetlight somewhere outside making the curtain glow faintly at its edges. A room that was neither cold nor dark nor made of concrete. She sat up, pressed both palms flat on the mattress, breathed. Kellen's estate. She was at Kellen's estate. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after that, not sleeping but not quite awake either, existing in the particular purgatory of someone whose body had decided that 6 weeks of hypervigilance wasn't something you simply switched off. Eventually, she gave up on sleep entirely, found the clothes that had been left for her so plain, practical. Someone had paid attention to what she'd actually need, and dressed in the dark. The house was quiet. She found the kitchen by memory and instinct, and the faint smell of coffee, which turned out to be a machine someone had set on a timer. She poured a cup and stood at the kitchen window and watched the rain move through the security lights outside. She heard him before she saw him. Kellen moved quietly for a big man, but she'd spent 3 years learning the specific rhythm of him, the particular weight of his footsteps, the way he entered a room without announcing himself, the habit he had of pausing in a doorway before coming through it like he was reading the room first. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at her. "You should be sleeping," he said. "You should be sleeping," she said. He crossed to the coffee machine, poured his own cup, stood on the other side of the kitchen island from her, and for a moment they were just two people with coffee in the early morning, and if she didn't think too hard about the chain mark on her wrist, she could almost believe this was ordinary. "Tell me about Marcus Vale," she said. He set his cup down, looked at her with an expression she recognized, the one where he was deciding how much to say and in what order. "Not the managed version," she said. "Everything. Elena, you said you wouldn't manage what I know." A beat. He picked his cup back up. Marcus was a financial executor. He moved money between holding companies, managed the operational accounts for several business arrangements. He was careful, he was consistent, and for 8 years I had no reason not to trust him. And then 6 months ago he disappeared, along with approximately $11 million that didn't belong to him. She absorbed that. Whose money? Kellen's jaw tightened slightly. A portion of it was mine. The larger portion belonged to 2 other organizations I have business relationships with, criminal organizations. So he stole from people who can't go to the police about it. Correct. And they came after you for it. They came after me for answers, Kellen said, the distinction precise and deliberate. They believed, reasonably, that I had to have known. that no one walks away from an arrangement like Marcus had without the knowledge of the person running it. Elena turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. The warmth of it was still something she was consciously grateful for, which she recognized as something she'd have to work through later. But you didn't know. I didn't know. And Marcus, before he ran, he did something I didn't discover until after you were taken. He said it flatly, without inflection. But she'd been reading his inflections for 3 years, and she heard what lived underneath the flatness. He told people, specifically, the people he owed money to, the people who were hunting him, that my secretary had full access to the financial records, that you'd been involved in managing the hidden accounts, that if they wanted the information trail, they should start with you. The kitchen was very quiet. He used me, Elena said. He invented a version of you that served his interests and handed that version to men who had every reason to act on it. And Darius believed him. Darius chose to believe him, Kellen said, and the distinction was not subtle. There is a difference. Marcus gave Darius an excuse to do something Darius had already been considering. She looked up. What does that mean? Kellen picked up his coffee cup, set it down again without drinking from it. It means that Darius has been positioning himself for 2 years to take a larger portion of certain business interests that we share. It means that with Marcus's money gone and the organizations I work with angry and looking for someone to blame, Darius saw an opportunity to redirect attention toward me. And it means that taking you, taking the person closest to me, was not purely about information. She went very still. It was a message. It was a move, he said. Against me. You were the piece he chose. She sat with that for a long time. The rain kept moving outside. The coffee cooled in her hands. He told me you weren't looking, she said finally. He said you didn't care, that you'd replaced me. Kellen looked at her directly. His eyes were the kind of dark that didn't reflect much light, and in the early morning kitchen, they were very steady. I had every available resource looking for you within 6 hours of your disappearance. I didn't sleep for 4 days. I dismantled 3 separate operations trying to find where he'd put you. He paused. Darius knew exactly what he was saying when he said those things to you. He wanted you to stop hoping. Elena breathed in slowly through her nose. The anger was back. That hot, focused thing she'd been carrying for 6 weeks. The thing that had kept her thinking clearly when thinking clearly was the only weapon she had. What are you going to do about him? She asked. What needs to be done? That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now that won't get complicated. She pushed away from the counter. Kellen, I was chained to a wall for 6 weeks because of a move someone made against you. I think I've earned something more than what needs to be done. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softened exactly, but adjusted. Like he was recalibrating. There's a meeting tomorrow night, he said. The 2 organizations Marcus stole from want a reckoning. They want either their money back or proof of who took it. I have the proof. I've spent 6 weeks building a financial case that shows exactly where Marcus moved the money and that I had no part in it. He paused. But Darius is going to be at that meeting, and Darius has his own version of events that he's spent 6 weeks preparing. He's going to try to pin it on you. He's going to try to finish what he started. She looked at him. And me? You, Kellen said carefully, are going to stay here, where it's safe, while I deal with this. She almost laughed. Not with humor. That's what you think is going to happen? She said. Elena, I spent 6 weeks in a box because men I barely knew decided my life was a playing piece. And now you want me to sit in your house and wait while someone who kidnapped me walks into a room and tells his version of a story I was actually there for? The people at that meeting are dangerous. I know. I know exactly how dangerous they are, Kellen. I've had 6 weeks to think about nothing else. She set her cup down on the counter, hard enough that it clicked against the stone. You are not locking me up in a nicer building and calling it protection. The silence between them was the kind that has weight. You're not ready, he said. Don't tell me what I'm ready for. You've been out of that warehouse for 12 hours. And in 12 hours I've slept, eaten and had this conversation, and I'm still the most organized person in this building. Don't make me less than I am because what happened to me was hard. It was hard. That doesn't mean I'm broken." Kellen was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the rain shifted and the security lights outside flickered and the coffee machine clicked off its warming cycle. "I hear you," he said finally. "Good." She picked up her cup again. Her hands were steady. "Now tell me everything else." He told her everything else over the next 2 hours. They moved from the kitchen to his study, a room she knew well from 3 years of bringing him briefs and correspondence and the occasional argument. And he laid it out the way she'd always appreciated, in order, without softening the difficult parts, without curating the information to produce a specific reaction from her. Marcus Vale had been skimming for years before the large theft. Small amounts, carefully routed, the kind of thing that only showed up if you were looking for it specifically. He hadn't been looking because Marcus had been with him long enough that looking had felt unnecessary. That was the mistake, and Kellen named it as a mistake without dressing it up as anything else. The 11 million had been moved through 6 different accounts across 3 countries in a span of 48 hours before Marcus went dark. The money was largely gone. Some of it recovered, most of it layered through transactions designed to make recovery impossible in any practical time frame. What remained was the question of responsibility, and that was the question that had made Elena a target. Darius had built a parallel narrative over 6 weeks. She understood this as Kellen walked her through it. Darius had been preparing the way you prepare something you intend to use, collecting statements and documents, and selectively presented evidence designed to suggest that Kellen had orchestrated the theft and used Elena as the operational link. It was careful work. It was also, she noted with a cold kind of clarity, exactly the kind of work that required advanced preparation. Darius hadn't assembled this in response to Marcus's disappearance. He'd started building it before. "He knew Marcus was going to run," she said. Kellen looked at her. "He knew," she said again. "Or he facilitated it. This isn't opportunism, Kellen. This is a plan. Marcus running created the opening, but Darius didn't scramble to use it. He was ready. The narrative was ready. Taking me was already in the plan." Kellen was quiet for a moment that had a particular quality to it. The kind of quiet that means someone is integrating something they hadn't fully faced yet. "Yes," he said, "you already knew that. I suspected it." "How long?" He met her eyes. "About 3 weeks in." 3 weeks. She absorbed that. "You knew 3 weeks ago that Darius might have known Marcus was going to run, that this might have been coordinated, and you kept looking for me." "Of course I kept looking for you." "I mean," she stopped, reoriented. "If Darius and Marcus were coordinated, then Darius knew where I was the entire time. Which means when you were trying to find me through normal channels, through pressure and information and the usual methods, he was feeding me false leads," Kellen said. "Yes." She stood up, walked to the window. Outside, dawn was starting to show at the edges, the sky going from black to the particular gray-blue of Pacific Northwest mornings. "He fed you bad information for 6 weeks, she said, while I was 10 miles from this office." 14 miles. 14 miles. She turned around. "How did you finally find me?" "One of his own people." Kellen's voice was flat in the way that concealed something much sharper underneath. A man who'd been in Darius's operation for 11 years and decided that whatever was happening in that warehouse had gone on long enough. "Someone turned." "Someone had a daughter about your age," Kellen said. "He told me where you were at 8 o'clock last night. We moved at 9. She stood there with that for a moment. The specific human detail of it, a man with a daughter, a moral line he couldn't quite cross, landed differently than the rest of it, more quietly. "I want to know his name," she said. "Why?" "Because I want to know the name of the person who ended it." Kellen looked at her for a moment. "Raymond Chu." She filed it away, said nothing else about it, turned back to the window. "The meeting tomorrow night," she said. "What do you need from me?" "Elena, not asking for permission, asking what you need." Another one of those weighted silences. She'd gotten good at waiting them out. She'd had practice, the kind no one wanted. "There are financial records that pass through your office," he he said slowly. Documents you handled, logged, and filed that form part of the chain of evidence I need. Legitimate records. But the only person who can authenticate the handling sequence, who touched what, when, in what order, is you. Because I'm the one who processed them. Because you're the one who processed them. She turned from the window. So you need me at the meeting. I need your testimony, your authentication. Yes. And Darius knows this. Darius knows this. She sat back down across from him, looked at him steadily. He kidnapped me to keep me out of exactly this kind of moment. Yes. Then showing up is the only thing that makes sense. Kellen leaned forward, set his elbows on the desk. The two organizations at this meeting are not businessmen, Elena. They are not patient, and they are not predictable, and if things go wrong in that room, things go wrong in rooms. That's the nature of rooms. She held his gaze. I know who you are, Kellen. I know what you do. I have spent 3 years managing your life and protecting your schedule and fielding calls from people who would never make the guest list at a charity dinner. I am not naive about what your world contains. I was never naive about it. You never had to be inside it before. I was inside it the moment Darius decided I was useful. Her voice was level. That happened 6 weeks ago. I didn't choose it. But I'm in it now, and the only way out is through. He looked at her for a long time. His face did the thing it sometimes did. The tightening along the jaw, the slight pull around his eyes, the specific expression that meant he was fighting between what he wanted to do and what he understood he couldn't. All right, he said. It came out quiet. Heavier than 2 words usually sounded. All right, she confirmed. The day passed in a controlled kind of tension that Elena recognized as Kellen's version of preparation. People came and went from the estate. Men she didn't know, a woman in her 40s who turned out to be a financial analyst and who spent 3 hours with Kellen behind a closed door, a lawyer who arrived at noon and left at 3 with a briefcase and an expression that suggested he'd been having a better week before this meeting. Elena spent the morning reviewing documents. Kellen had the records brought to her own records, the ones from her office, neatly assembled, and she went through them with the systematic focus that had always been her particular strength. She was looking for her own fingerprints in them, the specific traces that would tell her what she could authenticate and what the limits of her testimony would be. She found something else instead. It took her the better part of 4 hours to see it, partly because it was designed not to be seen. But she'd processed every document in this stack personally, and she knew her own filing sequences the way she knew her own handwriting, and there was a pattern in the dating stamps that was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that required you to know the original sequence intimately. 3 documents had been backdated, not forged outright. The paper was correct, the signatures were correct, the formatting was precise. But the timestamps embedded in the digital filing system didn't match the physical stamps on the paper copies. Someone had altered the physical dates after the digital filing had already occurred. Someone who had access to her office. Someone who had access to her office after she disappeared. She sat with that very carefully, went through it again, then again. Then she picked up the phone Kellen had given her and called his direct line. He picked up on the second ring. The records, she said. 3 of them have been altered. The Meridian transfer, the Coastal Holdings filing, and the November reconciliation document. Someone changed the physical date stamps after I filed the digital versions. A silence. Then, you're certain. I created the filing system. I'm certain. How recently? She looked at the timestamps again. The digital originals are from 14 months ago. The physical alterations would have had to happen in the last 8 weeks. The ink oxidation is different, marginally, but I know what that paper looks like when it's been sitting for over a year. Elena. His voice had shifted. If those documents are altered, then someone in your organization did it while I was gone. Someone who knew exactly what they were building toward. She paused. And someone who needed those specific documents to place me in the chain of handling for transactions I never actually touched. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had a different texture, the kind of silence that forms when the shape of something becomes visible all at once. Bring me the documents, Kellen said. I'm on my way. She gathered the 3 files, stood up, looked at the mark on her wrist, fading now but still there, the particular color of something that had been held too tight for too long. Someone had not just kidnapped her. Someone had used her absence to build a case against Kellen, using her own office, her own files, her own name attached to transactions she'd never touched. They'd needed her gone to do it, and they'd needed her to stay gone. She walked down the hallway toward Kellen's study with the files under her arm. The meeting was tomorrow night, and whoever had altered those documents, whether it was Darius working through a proxy or someone else entirely, someone she hadn't yet seen, they were going to walk into that meeting tomorrow night believing they had covered every angle. They had not covered this one, because they hadn't counted on her coming back. They hadn't counted on her knowing her own work well enough to see the seams in what they'd built on top of it. They'd taken her out of the equation because they'd assumed she was just a secretary, someone who processed things without understanding them, who handled information without owning it. She pushed open the door to Kellen's study. He was already standing. Both the financial analyst and the lawyer were still in the room, and when Elena set the 3 files on the desk in front of him, everyone in the room looked at them. "These are the documents," she said, "and I need to tell you something else." Kellen looked at her. "Whoever altered these had a key to my office," she said. "Not a copied key, not a bypassed lock, an actual key, which means this came from inside. Not someone peripheral, not someone contracted. Someone with standing access." The analyst leaned forward. "How many people have that access?" Elena looked at her, then back at Kellen. "In the legitimate business structure," she said, 4 people. Me, Kellen, the building manager, and his office coordinator. She paused. The pause had weight. And Darius Vallon, he has a key because Kellen gave him one 7 years ago when they were structuring the original partnership. The room was very still. "He's been in my office," Elena said. "He had access the entire time I was gone. He built the case from inside my own files, using my own systems, and then he planned to walk into a room tomorrow night and present it as evidence." She looked at Kellen, and her voice stayed level but just barely. "He didn't just take me to get information. He took me so he could use my office. I was removed so he could move in." Kellen picked up one of the files, looked at it, set it down. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, which, in Elena's experience, was when it was most dangerous. "Get Hargrove on the phone," he said to the lawyer, "and pull every access log for the 14th floor going back 9 weeks. The lawyer was already moving. Kellen looked at Elena. The expression on his face was not something she had a clean category for. It was anger and something adjacent to devastation and something else entirely that she wasn't ready to name. "He planned this for longer than I thought," Kellen said. "Yes," she said. "He was in your office, your space. Yes. While you were—" He stopped. "While I was chained to his floor," she said, simply, without flinching from it. "Yes." The silence that followed that sentence was the kind that changed things, the kind you couldn't go back through to the other side of. Kellen reached across the desk and picked up his phone. Whatever he'd planned for tomorrow night's meeting had just become something else entirely. Kellen stood at the window of his study with his phone in his hand and didn't make the call. Not yet. Elena watched him from across the desk and understood, in the specific way she understood things about him that she'd never been asked to articulate, that he was doing the thing he did when the ground had shifted, standing very still while he recalculated everything from the new position. The lawyer had stepped out. The financial analyst, a woman named Priya, who had the particular energy of someone accustomed to finding things that were hidden, was bent over the documents Elena had brought in, running her finger along the date stamps without touching them. "The ink differentiation is real," Priya said quietly. "You can see it if you know what you're looking for. The altered dates used a different pen. Same color, close match, but the oxidation rate is off by at least 6 weeks." She looked up at Elena. "You caught this by memory?" "I created the system," Elena said again. It was the only answer that mattered. Priya nodded slowly, looked back at the documents. "Whoever did this was good. This isn't amateur work. They understood document forensics well enough to approximate the aging. They just didn't account for the gap between the physical and digital timestamps because they probably assumed no one who survived 6 weeks of what you went through would be functional enough to cross-reference on day 2. They underestimated her," Kellen said from the window. He said it without turning around. Consistently, Elena said. Kellen turned then. He crossed to the desk and looked at the 3 documents, and his jaw was doing the thing it did. The tight, controlled tension of a man keeping a very large and very dangerous thing contained inside a relatively small space. The access logs. Hargrove will have them within the hour. If Darius's key card shows activity on the 14th floor in the last 9 weeks, it will, Elena said. You're certain? He had to have been in there himself. You don't trust something this precise to someone else. Not if you're Darius. She paused. He's meticulous. That's always been his quality. He's the man in the room who ties up the loose ends, and I was a loose end he thought he'd tied up. He wouldn't have left the document alteration to a proxy. Kellen picked up his phone again. This time he made the call. She listened to him talk to Hargrove, terse, specific, the way he communicated when he needed results rather than conversation. And she sat down in the chair across from the desk because her legs had been carrying the weight of the day, and it was time to acknowledge that. Not weakness, just physics. When he hung up, he looked at her with an expression she'd learned to read as the closest he got to openly worried. You should eat something, he said. I should. But first tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that if those logs confirm what you're saying, we walk into tomorrow night's meeting with more than financial records. We walk in with evidence of active document manipulation and unauthorized access. He sat down, put his hands flat on the desk, which changes the nature of the meeting. It goes from a reckoning about Marcus's money to a reckoning about Darius. Yes. He won't see it coming, Elena said. No. Kellen was quiet for a moment. Which is the only advantage we have right now, and I'd like to preserve it. Nobody outside this room knows what you found today. Priya raised one hand slightly without looking up. Understood. Good. Kellen looked back at Elena. That means no calls, no messages, nothing that leaves a digital trace between now and tomorrow night. Darius has people watching my communications. He has to. It's what I do in his position. If he gets any indication that we've found the alterations, he'll pull out of the meeting, Elena said, or he'll accelerate. She understood what that meant. Accelerate meant someone made a move before the meeting happened, and a move made before the meeting happened was not a move made in a room with witnesses and the political complexity of multiple organizations present. A move made before the meeting was just a move. All right, she said. Nothing leaves this room. Kellen nodded, then, quietly, good work, Elena. She'd heard him say those words before, occasionally, carefully, never effusively. They'd always landed as professional acknowledgement. Tonight they landed differently, and she chose not to examine why. Now I'm going to eat something, she said, and stood up. Eat. The access logs arrived at 11:47 that night. Elena was in the kitchen again, a pattern she was apparently establishing, when Kellen came to find her with a tablet in his hand and an expression that confirmed before he said a word that the logs had shown exactly what she'd predicted. 7 entries, he said. He set the tablet on the counter. Darius's key card. The 14th floor. Over a period of 5 weeks, starting 8 days after you disappeared. She looked at the log entries. 7 visits, some of them lasting less than 30 minutes, in and out, specific and purposeful. One of them lasting almost 2 hours. The 2-hour visit, she said. That's when he did the documents. That's what Priya thinks, too. She's right. Elena pushed the tablet back toward him. He needed time to be careful. The shorter visits were probably reconnaissance, going through the files, identifying which documents would serve his purpose before he altered anything. She paused. He knew my system. He'd have to navigate it efficiently. He must have studied it. Or someone told him how it was organized. She looked up. Kellen's expression was careful. I'm not suggesting you told him. I'm saying someone with knowledge of your filing system helped him navigate it. She thought about that, went through the list in her head, who had spent enough time in her office, who had seen her work the system, who would know the organizational logic well enough to give Darius a roadmap. It wasn't a long list, but it wasn't as short as she'd like. I'll need to think about that, she said. Take your time. We have until tomorrow night. She almost laughed. That's a very specific amount of time. It is. He leaned against the counter across from her. In the kitchen light, he looked like what he actually was, a man who hadn't slept enough in weeks, who'd been carrying something heavy for longer than was sustainable, who was very good at not showing it and therefore showed it only in small ways that required knowing him to see. The particular tension across his shoulders, the slight hollowness around his eyes. "When did you last sleep?" she asked. "I sleep." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." She looked at him steadily. "Kellen, after tomorrow night, however tomorrow night goes, you need to sleep." "Noted." "I mean it." "I know you do." Something in his expression shifted in a way that was hard to categorize. "You've always meant what you said. It's one of the things that made you—" He stopped. "Made me what?" He looked at the counter, picked up his coffee cup, set it down. "Irreplaceable," he said finally. Simple, without any apparent effort to make it land a particular way, which made it land harder than if he'd tried. She didn't respond to it directly. She filed it in the part of her that was keeping track of things she'd examine later, when the immediate situation wasn't requiring everything she had. "Get some sleep," she said instead. "I'll be here in the morning." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Morning came gray and deliberate, the way Pacific Northwest mornings did in October, and Elena was up before it fully arrived, sitting at the desk in the room they'd given her, going through a list she'd been constructing in her head since 3 a.m. Who knew her filing system? The list had 5 names by the time the sky went from black to gray. 5 people who'd spent enough time in proximity to her work to understand the organizational logic. She went through each one systematically. Motivation, access, relationship to Darius, anything that didn't fit. 4 of the 5 she eliminated without difficulty. The 5th sat there and wouldn't move. His name was Conrad Reyes. He was the office coordinator, the position that sat directly below Elena in the administrative structure, the person who handled the overflow of her work when the volume exceeded what one person could manage. He'd been in that role for 14 months. He was 26, efficient, quietly ambitious in the way that young men in proximity to power often were, and he had been the person who, in Elena's absence, would have been responsible for maintaining the administrative function of Kellen's legitimate office. He would have been there during all 7 of Darius's visits, potentially before them, if Darius had made contact, if someone had reached out with an offer that a 26-year-old coordinator in a frightening organization might find difficult to refuse. She sat with this for a long time. Then she wrote his name at the bottom of her list and put the list in her pocket. The meeting was scheduled for 9 p.m. at a location that Kellen described only as a private venue on the east side, which Elena understood to mean a place without public record or public access. The kind of location that existed in the operational margins of the kind of business relationships being discussed. They spent the day in preparation. Kellen's team, the people she was beginning to map as the inner operational circle she'd always known existed but never directly intersected with, moved through the estate with the controlled urgency of people executing a plan that had to be exactly right. Priya had spent the night with the documents and produced a forensic summary that was, Elena thought, genuinely impressive work. Clear, specific, defensible. The lawyer Hargrove arrived at noon with a second opinion that confirmed everything. Elena spent 2 hours with Kellen going through the authentication sequence she'd be providing at the meeting. The specific chain of handling for the legitimate documents, the filing timestamps, the processing notes she kept that created an independent verification trail. She knew this material the way she knew her own hands. It was not going to be difficult. What was going to be difficult was everything else. At 4 in the afternoon, Kellen's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face, small, fast, contained. He took the call in the hallway, which he did when he needed to be somewhere she wasn't, which he did rarely. She waited. Heard the low murmur of his voice through the door, but not the words. Heard a particular quality in the murmur that she recognized as the sound he made when he was receiving information that required him to stay still and not react. He came back in 4 minutes, sat down across from her, put his phone on the table face down. "Tell me," she said. "That was a contact inside the Solano organization. One of the two groups at tonight's meeting. He paused. Darius reached out to them last night, privately, outside the meeting structure. She felt something cold move through her chest. What did he offer them? He offered them me, Kellen said simply. He told them that he has evidence, the altered documents, your name on the handling chain, that proves I orchestrated the theft with Marcus and then had Marcus removed to protect myself. He told them that tonight's meeting is a setup, that I'm planning to use the meeting to redirect blame and walk away clean. He looked at her. He told them that the only way they recover their money is if they act before the meeting ends. She understood the shape of it immediately. He's not planning to debate you in that room tonight. He's planning to let the Solano organization do what he can't do publicly. If they believe his version, they walk into that meeting already decided. Kellen's voice was very level. And a room full of men who believe they've been robbed of millions and have been pointed at a specific target is not a debate. It's a conclusion. Can you contact the Solano organization directly, counter his version before tonight? I tried. My contact says they've already closed the channel. They're not taking communication from me or anyone connected to me until after the meeting. He looked at her. Darius is good. He's been planning this for a long time, she said. Yes. So he feeds them a version of tonight that primes them to act. He shows up to the meeting with his altered documents. And by the time I stand up to authenticate the real chain of handling, she stopped. They won't believe you, Kellen said, because Darius will have already told them that your testimony is part of my plan, that you're loyal to me, that anything you say is fabricated. He's discredited me preemptively. He's discredited both of us. And the moment the meeting turns, we can't prove anything in real time, she said. The forensic summary, the access logs, that all takes time to present, time to absorb. If they walk in already decided, they won't sit through a presentation, Kellen said. No. She stood up, walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still low and heavy, the light the color of old pewter. There has to be something he hasn't covered, she said. He's thorough, but he's not. There are limits. He built this on a framework that required me to stay gone. He built it on altered documents that he thought no one would authenticate because I was the only person who could. He built it on a version of events that only holds if no one in that room knows the access logs exist. She turned around. Who in the Solano organization does he not control? Who in that room owes him nothing? Kellen was quiet for a moment. There's a man who'll be there. Victor Lane. He runs the financial side of the Solano operation, and he is constitutionally incapable of accepting a version of numbers that hasn't been verified independently. Darius knows this, which is why he'll try to move the meeting past the financial evidence quickly, frame it as settled, push toward the conclusion. But if Victor Lane sees the access logs... Victor Lane is a man who follows a paper trail the way some men follow religion, Kellen said. If he sees authenticated proof of document manipulation, key card logs, timestamp discrepancies, forensic verification, he will stop the room. Can you get the logs and Priya's summary to him before tonight? He won't accept direct contact from me. Not now. Kellen stood up. But there might be another way. He looked at her. You said Conrad Reyes. She pulled the list from her pocket, set it on the table without saying anything. Kellen looked at it. His eyes stopped on the last name. You think he helped Darius navigate your office, Kellen said. I think it's the most logical explanation for how Darius moved through my system efficiently. She paused. And I think if Conrad made a choice to help Darius, there's a possibility he made that choice because he was scared. Not because he wanted to, which means he might be willing to make a different choice now, Kellen said. If someone gave him a reason. Kellen looked at her for a long time. You want to talk to him. I know him. He worked for me for 14 months. If there's a version of this where he's reachable, I'll know within 5 minutes of being in the room with him. And if he's not reachable, then we know that too, she said. And we go to tonight with what we have. Conrad Reyes lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Northwest Portland that he could afford because Kellen's legitimate business paid its administrative staff well. He answered the door in jeans and a gray sweatshirt, and when he saw Elena standing in the hallway, The color left his face so completely and so fast that she knew, in that exact moment, that she'd been right about him. He tried to close the door. She put her hand on it. Conrad. Her voice was quiet, not angry. She'd thought carefully on the drive over about what register to use, and she'd chosen quiet because loud would make him defensive, and defensive men closed up. I'm not here to hurt you. I need 5 minutes. I don't... His voice broke. He was 26 and terrified, and she could see, underneath the terror, something that looked like relief, and that she understood as the particular relief of someone who'd been carrying a secret that was too heavy. I don't know what you think. I know about the visits, she said. 7 of them. I know he was in my office. I know he needed someone to navigate the system. She paused. I know that when someone like Darius Vallon asks something of someone in your position, the word no isn't simple. His jaw was shaking slightly. He was holding the door and his knuckles were white. Let me in, she said. 5 minutes. He stepped back. The apartment was neat in the way that people keep spaces neat when they're anxious. Everything in its place as a way of controlling the things that couldn't be controlled. He stood in the middle of his living room and didn't offer her a seat, and she didn't take one. He came to me 3 days after you disappeared, Conrad said. Came out like a confession that had been waiting. He said you'd left, that you'd resigned, and there was sensitive material in the filing system that needed to be reorganized for transition, and that he had authorization from Kellen to access the office. And you believed him. He looked at the floor. I wanted to. He had a key. He acted like it was ordinary. And I was 26 years old, and he was Darius Vallon, and I didn't... He stopped. I showed him the filing logic, the organizational structure. I didn't know what he was going to do with it. But you found out. He was quiet. Conrad. She waited. I went back through the files 2 weeks later, he said quietly. Routine maintenance. And I found the dates on 3 documents that didn't... He stopped. They didn't match. And I knew. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I knew what I'd helped him do. And you said nothing. He's Darius Vallon. The name came out with a weight that said everything about why a 26-year-old coordinator with a lease payment and no leverage said nothing. What was I supposed to do? What you're going to do right now, Elena said. You're going to write down everything. The visit, what you showed him, what you found when you went back. You're going to sign it, and then you're going to let me take it to someone who can use it tonight. He looked at her. His eyes were wet. They'll come after me. Darius will be in no position to come after anyone by the end of tonight, she said. And Kellen? She paused, chose her words. Kellen takes care of people who take care of him, even people who made a mistake when they were scared. You can promise that? She looked at him steadily. I can tell you that in 3 years I have never seen him punish someone for being afraid. I've seen him punish disloyalty. There's a difference, and you know which side of that line you're on right now. Conrad Reyes sat down on his couch, put his face in his hands, stayed there for a moment that felt long and necessary. Then he stood up, went to the kitchen counter, and picked up a pen. Quote, they had Conrad's statement, and they had 40 minutes before they needed to leave for the east side when Kellen's phone rang again. This time, he didn't step into the hallway. He put it on speaker without being asked, and she understood that as a thing that had shifted between them. The voice on the phone was one she didn't recognize. Male, older, careful in the way of men who'd learned to be careful through specific experience. Mr. Thorne, the voice said, this is Victor Lane. Elena went very still. Mr. Lane, Kellen said, I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to hang up, because I shouldn't be making this call, and we both know it. A pause. Darius Vallon called our principal this morning with a version of tonight that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The Harwick transfer dates he's presenting don't reconcile with our own records of the transaction. I've been looking at this for 6 hours. Another pause. If you have the actual documentation, bring it tonight. I will make sure it is heard. The call ended. The room was quiet. Then Elena said, he found the same discrepancy we found. Darius built his case on documents he altered, Kellen said. He didn't know that some of those transactions had independent verification on the Solano side. He thought he'd covered everything. He thought he'd covered everything, Kellen confirmed. She looked at the time. 38 minutes. We need to go, she said. Kellen picked up his jacket from the chair, looked at her. You ready? She thought about the warehouse, the chain, the cold floor and the work light and the weeks of Darius's voice asking questions she didn't have answers to. She thought about Conrad Reyes's shaking hands and Victor Lane's careful voice and the 3 altered documents she'd identified because she knew her own work better than anyone who'd tried to use it against her. She picked up her bag. I've been ready, she said, since the moment you cut that chain. They walked out into the heavy Portland evening, the sky pressing low and dark over the city, and somewhere across town Darius Vallon was sitting in a car or a room or a carefully prepared position, believing that he had accounted for every variable, that the woman he'd left in the dark was still in the dark, that the version of tonight he'd engineered over weeks of meticulous planning was about to unfold exactly as designed. He did not know about Conrad's statement. He did not know about Victor Lane's call. He did not know that Elena Voss had spent 14 months building a filing system so precisely organized that his tampering had left fingerprints she could read like a signature. He had made the mistake that careful men sometimes made when they planned too thoroughly. He had planned for the version of reality he understood, and he had not left room for the version where the piece he'd removed came back knowing exactly what had been done with her absence. The car pulled onto the bridge over the Willamette, and the city lights reflected in the water below, and Elena sat with her hands in her lap and her jaw set, and somewhere between the bridge and the east side, she made a decision that had been building since she woke up on a cold concrete floor 6 weeks ago and decided not to stop thinking. She was not walking into that room as a witness. She was walking in as the person who had survived what Darius built, understood what he'd constructed, and was now going to dismantle it in front of the men he'd recruited to finish her off. The car stopped. Kellen looked at her across the seat. Whatever happens in there, he said, stay close. Whatever happens in there, she said, let me speak first. A beat. He nodded. She got out of the car and walked toward the building where Darius Vallon was waiting, and for the first time in 6 weeks, she was not afraid. And that absence of fear was not the absence of understanding what she was walking into. It was something else, something harder and cleaner. The particular courage of someone who has already survived the worst version and knows, with absolute certainty, that she is not going back to it. The building had no sign outside and no visible security, which meant the security was everywhere and simply not visible. Elena clocked 3 men before she reached the door. One near the corner, who was looking at his phone too deliberately. One in a parked car that hadn't moved since they turned onto the street. One standing inside the lobby glass who shifted his weight when their car stopped. She noted them the way she'd learned to note things in the last 6 weeks, which was differently than she'd noted things before. Before, she cataloged information because it was useful. Now she cataloged it because her body had decided, at a level below conscious thought, that the world was a place where you needed to know where the exits were. Kellen touched the small of her back once as they went through the door. Not possessive, just present. She didn't acknowledge it, but she didn't move away from it either. The lobby was marble and low light, and the particular hush of a space that was expensive enough to have absorbed sound. A man she didn't know met them and led them without speaking down a hallway and through a set of double doors into a room that had been set up with the geometry of negotiations. A long table, chairs on both sides, a head position that was technically neutral and actually not. There were already people in the room. She scanned them fast. 6 men she didn't know, distributed in a pattern that told her which organization each belonged to by who sat closest to whom. A man in his early 60s at the far end of the table, trim, gray at the temples, watching the door with eyes that processed everything and gave back nothing, who she identified as Victor Lane before anyone said his name. 2 men flanking the table's midpoint who had the particular stillness of people whose job was to be ready. And Darius. He was seated to the left of the table's center, which put him in a position of apparent deference that she recognized immediately as calculated. He'd chosen that seat specifically, close enough to the center to matter, removed enough to appear reasonable. He was in a dark suit, and his expression when she walked in was the most controlled thing in the room, for exactly 2 seconds. The control slipped, just at the edges, Just long enough for her to see it. The slight widening, the rapid recalibration, the moment where his face had to catch up with the information his brain was processing, which was that Elena Voss was not in a warehouse anymore and was standing 12 feet away from him looking directly at him. Then the mask came back. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, didn't speak, didn't look away. Then she turned and took a seat on Kellen's right and set her bag on the table and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed slowly through her nose. Her heart was going. She was aware of it, the fast, muscular thud of it against her ribs, the way her body had registered being in the same room as the man who'd chained her to a floor and decided to let her sit in the dark indefinitely. She couldn't control the heartbeat. She could control everything else. A man at the head of the table, not Victor Lane, someone she didn't recognize, apparently the convener, cleared his throat. "We're here to address the outstanding matter of the veil theft and establish responsibility. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Vallon, both parties have indicated they have material to present. Given the circumstances," his eyes moved briefly to Elena and away, "we'll proceed." "I'll go first," Darius said. His voice was the same as it had been in the warehouse, smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who was the most sensible person in the room and knew it. Kellen said nothing. Darius opened a folder. He placed 3 documents on the table in front of him. She could see from where she sat that they were copies, which was smart. The originals were presumably somewhere he controlled. "The Harwick transfer," he said, "processed through the executive office 14 months ago. The handling notation shows Elena Voss as the processing administrator." He paused. "The Coastal Holdings filing, same administrator, same office, with a dating signature that places this document in a chain of transactions that connects to the Veil accounts." He placed the 3rd document. "And the November reconciliation, which contains a notation in Ms. Voss's hand that references an account number belonging to one of the entities Marcus Vale used to move the money." The room was quiet. "What this shows," Darius said, "is that the flow of information, and therefore the flow of funds, ran through Kellen Thorne's executive office with the knowledge and participation of his most trusted staff. Whether Ms. Voss acted independently or at Mr. Thorne's direction, the chain connects." Victor Lane's eyes moved from the documents to Elena. Didn't move yet. "I'd like to respond," Elena said. The convener looked at her. "Mr. Thorne's representative." "I'm not his representative," she said. "I'm the administrator those documents reference, the person whose name is on them. I'd like to speak to them directly." A small silence. The convener looked at Kellen. "Let her speak," Kellen said. Darius's expression didn't change. He leaned back slightly, crossed one hand over the other on the table, the posture of a man who was comfortable because he'd already anticipated this. "The documents Mr. Vallon has presented are altered," Elena said. She said it without preamble, without building to it. Clean and direct. "The physical date stamps on all 3 were changed after the original digital filing. The originals exist in our system with timestamps that predate the dates shown on those copies by between 6 and 11 months. No reaction from Darius. She'd expected that. "I know they're altered," she continued, "because I created the filing system they exist in. I know my own organizational logic. And when I reviewed the physical copies against the digital originals yesterday, the discrepancy was clear." She opened her bag and removed Priya's forensic summary, placed it on the table and pushed it toward the center. "This is an independent forensic analysis prepared by a financial document examiner. It details the ink oxidation differential between the original stamps and the altered ones, the timestamp gap between the physical and digital records, and the conclusion that the alterations occurred within the last 9 weeks. Victor Lane reached forward and picked up the summary before anyone else moved. Darius uncrossed his hands. "A document prepared by someone in Thorne's employ. Priya Mehta," Elena said. "She was contracted independently for this analysis. Her credentials are on the front page. You're welcome to contact her directly." "The point," Darius said, his voice still controlled but with something moving under it now, a current she could feel from across the table, "is that Ms. Voss's testimony is inherently biased. She works for Kellen Thorne. She has every reason—" "She worked for me," Elena said. Past tense. Deliberate. She saw him register it. "For 3 years," she continued. And in 3 years, I processed thousands of documents, managed hundreds of transactions, and maintained a filing system that has never once had an irregularity identified until the 9 weeks I was held in a warehouse by your people. She let that land. Let the room hear it. While I was gone, someone accessed my office 7 times using a keycard registered to Darius Vallon. The building access logs for the 14th floor confirmed those visits. She produced the logs, placed them on the table. 7 entries over 5 weeks, one of them lasting nearly 2 hours, long enough to carefully alter the dating on 3 documents and approximate the paper aging. The room had changed. She could feel it. The specific change that happens when information shifts the gravity of a space, when the people listening recalibrate what they thought they were in the middle of. Darius stood up. "This is fabricated," he said. The smoothness was fraying now. Not gone. He was too disciplined for that. But fraying at the edges in a way she recognized as the sound of a prepared position beginning to fail. These logs could have been— "Sit down, Darius." Kellen's voice. Low, not loud. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it carried weight instead. Darius didn't sit. "The keycard logs are from the building management system," Kellen said, "which runs on a separate server maintained by an independent facilities company. My organization does not have administrative access to that system. Darius knows this because he was involved in selecting that company 8 years ago, specifically because of the independent verification it provided." He paused. "Would you like to explain to everyone in this room why your keycard appears on those logs, Darius?" 7 times. In the office of the woman you were holding in a warehouse. The silence that followed was the kind that felt physical. Darius's jaw moved. He was running calculations behind his eyes. She could see it. The rapid internal motion of a man restructuring in real time, looking for the angle, the redirect, the version of this that still worked. He'd built something meticulous, and it was coming apart from a direction he hadn't protected, and she could see the exact moment he decided to stop defending and go offensive. "You're a loyal woman," he said. To her. Directly. "I'll give you that. 6 weeks in a box and you walk in here and perform for him like nothing happened." His voice had changed. The reasonable warmth was gone. What was underneath it was colder. "You know what's interesting, Elena? The people who are most loyal are usually the people who don't know enough to know better." She looked at him. "Or the people who know exactly enough. You have no idea what Kellen is." He said it to the room now, his voice rising slightly. Not losing control, she realized, but making a choice to perform emotion, which was different and more dangerous. "You have no idea what this man has done, what he's built, what he's buried. You think he came for you because you matter to him?" He laughed. It was a real laugh, which was the worst kind. "He came for you because you were loose information, because you were out there, uncontrolled, and he needed to know what you'd said and to whom." She felt the room shift again. Different direction. She looked at Kellen. His face was still. The particular stillness she'd seen in the car on the bridge, in the kitchen at 4 a.m., in the study when she'd put the altered documents on his desk. The stillness that was not absence of feeling, but the weight of it held absolutely motionless. He said nothing, which was, she understood in that moment, the wrong move. "He came for me," she said, turning back to Darius, "because I had been taken by his business partner using his organization's resources and his infrastructure, and leaving me there would have been an admission that he didn't control his own house." She kept her voice level. "You're right that there was a practical reason. There are always practical reasons. That doesn't make what you did to me a negotiation tactic. It makes it a crime. And it doesn't change what's in those documents." Victor Lane set down the forensic summary. "The Harwick transfer dates," he said. His voice was the first genuinely neutral thing in the room. Not ally, not adversary, just a man following a paper trail. "The dates shown on Mr. Vallon's copies don't reconcile with our own transaction records. We received confirmation of that transfer on a date that is inconsistent with the stamp shown here." He looked at Darius. "By 11 days. Darius turned to look at him. "I noticed this morning," Victor Lane said, "which is why I made a call I probably shouldn't have made." He didn't look at Kellen. Stayed with Darius. "You presented these documents to our principal as evidence of Thorne's involvement. But if the dates are wrong, the chain breaks. And if the chain breaks, the dates are correct," Darius said. Flat. Fast. They're not, Victor Lane said, with the serenity of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had no emotional investment in which direction the numbers fell. Our records say otherwise, and our records were not prepared by anyone in this room. Darius put both hands on the table, leaned forward. Victor, you've known me for 12 years. I've known your numbers for 12 years, Victor Lane said. This morning I found out those aren't the same thing. Something cracked in the room. Not a sound. A pressure. The specific moment when a structure built on a particular set of assumptions meets information that the assumptions didn't account for, and the whole thing shudders. Elena reached into her bag and placed the last document on the table. Conrad Reyes, she said, administrative coordinator in my office for the last 14 months. He was present during Mr. Vallen's visits. He provided navigational assistance with the filing system, under the belief, he says, that Darius had authorization. She pushed the signed statement toward the center of the table. He discovered the document alterations 2 weeks later and said nothing because he was afraid. He's no longer afraid. She paused. This is his signed statement, witnessed and dated yesterday. Darius looked at the statement. She watched his eyes move across it, fast, precise, a man reading for what he needed to know and finding it immediately. His face went through something complicated. Then he straightened up, buttoned his jacket, and she understood with a clarity that felt cold and clean that she was watching a man decide that the room was no longer the battleground and that the next move was not going to happen here. This meeting, he said carefully, is premature. There are aspects of this situation that require further verification before any conclusions. Sit down, said one of the men she didn't know, from the other organization, the one that wasn't Solano. His voice was different from Kellen's, not controlled, flat in the way of someone for whom the voice was not where the danger lived. Nobody's leaving this room until we've finished. Darius looked at him, read him, and sat down. The room rearranged itself. She could feel it, the way the weight redistributed, who was looking at whom, the specific geometry of a situation that had shifted its center of gravity. The convener leaned forward. Mr. Vallen, the evidence as presented suggests that the documents you've brought tonight were altered using access to Ms. Voss's office during a period when she was being held against her will by members of your operation. Do you dispute this? A long pause. I dispute the characterization, Darius said. Then dispute it specifically. Another pause. Longer. She watched him go through his remaining options and come up short and go through them again. I had legitimate access to the 14th floor. The key was given to me by Kellen himself. The documents I've presented were retrieved from the official filing system. With altered dates, Victor Lane said, and represent the best available evidence of a financial chain that connects. Victor just told you his own organization's records contradict your dates, Elena said. By 11 days. That's not a rounding error. That's not a clerical mistake. That's a deliberate change made to place a transaction in a window that served your narrative. She leaned forward. Her voice stayed even, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger exactly, something more structural, the specific energy of someone who has been very patient for a very long time and is now entirely done being patient. You built a case on my name. You used my office, my files, my work history, and my absence to construct something that was supposed to destroy the man I work for and close the door permanently on the question of what happened to me. Her voice dropped. Did you think I wouldn't come back? Or did you think that if I did, no one would listen to me? Darius looked at her. For the first time since she'd walked into the room, his expression was not calculated. There was something in it that was almost, not remorse, she didn't give him that, but something adjacent to the recognition that he had made a specific error and that the error had a name and the name was standing across the table from him. Elena, don't, she said. He closed his mouth. Kellen spoke then. He'd been quiet for long enough that the room had almost forgotten he was the reason they were all here. Darius, we've known each other for 16 years. His voice was the quiet one, the dangerous quiet. I brought you into my organization because I trusted your judgment. I gave you access to my office, my resources, my people, because I believed we were building something together. He paused. You use that access to take the one person in my operation who never asked for anything she didn't earn, chain her to a floor for 6 weeks, and then walk into a room full of men we've done business with for a decade and try to hang both of us with her name." Darius said nothing. "The financial case against you for the facilitation of Marcus Vale's theft is being filed with the appropriate parties as of tonight," Kellen said. "I have the transactions. I have the communication records. I have evidence that you were in contact with Marcus in the 6 weeks before he ran, which means you knew. You knew, and you positioned yourself to benefit from the fallout." He reached into his jacket and placed a single folded document on the table. "That's a summary. The full file has already been distributed to 3 separate parties, none of whom are in this room, as a safeguard." Darius went very still. "The safeguard means," Kellen said, "that anything that happens to me, to Elena, or to anyone connected to either of us, results in the full file going public through every available channel. You cannot contain it by removing me. You cannot contain it at all." He looked at Darius with the expression she'd never seen before and still didn't have a clean word for, the one that had appeared in the warehouse doorway and hadn't fully gone away. "It's over." The room held. Then one of the unknown men shifted his chair back. "The matter of the 11 million. The money trail in the full file shows where it went," Kellen said. "Most of it went to accounts Darius controls. The documentation is detailed. Recovery is a conversation for another meeting." Victor Lane had been reading, going through the forensic summary page by page with the systematic thoroughness she'd hoped for when she'd walked in. He set it down, looked at the convener, said nothing, but the look was sufficient. The convener looked at Darius. "I think you understand the position you're in." Darius looked at the table. His hands were flat on it, both of them, palms down, very still. He was the most still thing in the room, which was not the stillness of a man who was calm. It was the stillness of a man whose options had narrowed to a point. She watched him. He looked up. Not at Kellen, at her. "You should have stayed gone," he said. It came out quiet, almost conversational. The statement of a man who was not threatening anymore, just acknowledging, in the bluntest possible way, where he'd gone wrong. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "That's the mistake you made." The door opened. She turned. 2 men she'd never seen came through it. Not from either organization, not from Kellen's team. They had a specific quality to them that she recognized from the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves in the room, the way the convener stood up immediately and stepped back. Behind them came a third man, mid-50s, a face she didn't know. But the way Darius reacted to that face, the way his careful stillness broke, just once, just briefly, into something that was unmistakably fear, told her that whoever this man was, he was the variable that Darius hadn't put in his plan either. "I apologize for the interruption," the man said. His voice was measured and dry and had an accent she couldn't immediately place. He looked at the room without any apparent concern for who was in it. "My name is unimportant. What is important is that I represent the party who provided the original capital that Marcus Vale was employed to manage." He paused. $11 million, which appears, based on the materials I've been reviewing for the last several hours, to have been redirected by a man currently sitting at this table. Every head turned toward Darius. The man with the dry voice looked at Darius with the particular expression of someone who had traveled a significant distance and intended to leave with what they came for. "Mr. Vallon," he said, "you and I need to have a conversation that is not in this room." Darius pushed back from the table. One of the 2 men who'd entered with the dry-voiced man moved to block the door. The second one stayed exactly where he was, with the patience of someone who, the second man stayed exactly where he was, with the patience of someone who had done this before, and understood that patience was the most effective tool in a room full of people who had run out of options. Darius looked at the blocked door, looked at the man with the dry voice, looked, finally, at the room, at Victor Lane's careful neutrality, at the convener who had stepped back and was now functionally a spectator, at the 2 unknown men from the second organization who had gone very still in the way of people who were recalculating whether they were witnesses or participants. Then he looked at Kellen. Something passed between them. 16 years of whatever they had been to each other. Partners, allies, Two men who had built something significant out of dangerous materials and mutual necessity, compressed into a single look that lasted less than 3 seconds and carried the weight of all of it. Kellen held his gaze and said nothing. Darius turned to the man with the dry voice. "I'd like my lawyer present." "That's a reasonable request," the man said pleasantly. "You can make that call from the car. I'm not getting in a car." "Mr. Vallon." The man's voice didn't change, didn't harden, didn't warm, stayed exactly where it was, which was somehow more alarming than either. "You redirected $11 million that belonged to people who have been patient for 6 months, specifically because they believed the responsible party would surface at this meeting. You are the responsible party. The car is waiting." He paused. "The alternative to the car is a conversation I am not authorized to have, but which my colleagues behind me are." The room understood what that meant. She understood what it meant, and Darius understood it better than anyone. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, put it on with the careful, deliberate movements of a man maintaining dignity because it was the only thing left to maintain. He buttoned it, straightened the lapels. He looked at Elena one last time. She thought he might say something. He looked like a man who had prepared speeches for many contingencies and was discovering that none of them fit this particular moment. His mouth opened slightly, closed. She didn't give him anything. Not contempt, not satisfaction, not the anger she'd been carrying for 6 weeks. She gave him nothing, which was the most honest response she had, because the truth was that she didn't feel the surge of release she'd expected. What she felt was more complicated and quieter than that, something she'd have to sit with for a long time before she understood its shape. He walked to the door. The two men fell in beside him. The man with the dry voice followed without looking back. The door closed. The room exhaled. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes without Darius in it, which was a different kind of meeting entirely. Victor Lane ran it, effectively, from his end of the table, asking questions with the methodical patience of someone building a structure that would hold weight. Kellen answered them. Elena answered the ones that touched the documents. Priya's forensic summary moved around the table and came back to the center and was referenced 4 separate times. The question of the $11 million was not fully resolved that night. She hadn't expected it to be. Money at that scale, moved through that many layers, didn't resolve in a single meeting. What was resolved was the question of who was responsible and who was not. By the time the convener called the meeting closed, that particular shape had been established clearly enough that no one in the room had a remaining argument with it. Kellen shook hands with men she didn't know, said things she half heard from across the table while she was gathering the documents back into the folder with the systematic care she couldn't turn off even now, even in this room, even after this night. Victor Lane appeared at her elbow. She looked up. He was closer than she'd expected. A compact man, she realized now, shorter than she'd registered from across the table, with the specific quality of stillness that belonged to people who'd spent decades not wasting motion. He looked at her with eyes that were doing the same thing hers did, which was registering information without committing to a response before the information was fully processed. "You found the date discrepancy in your own files," he said. "Yes. After 6 weeks in a warehouse. I was out for about 36 hours before I found it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement of something he hadn't anticipated encountering. "I've been in this business for a long time," he said. "I've sat across from a lot of people in a lot of rooms." He paused. "I don't say this often. What you did tonight was exceptional work." She looked at him steadily. "I was protecting my own name." "Yes," he said. "That's what made it exceptional." He walked away. She watched him go. Then she put the last document in the folder, picked up her bag, and stood up. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her thighs the same way she had in the chair at Kellen's estate the night she came back, the same way she had at 4 a.m. in the kitchen. The particular physical tick of a body that had been running on something other than normal fuel for a very long time and was beginning to register the cost. She breathed through it, waited for her hands to steady. They mostly did. Kellen appeared beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the warehouse doorway. That expression she still didn't have a clean category for, the the one that lived in the territory between professional and something else entirely that she'd been carefully not examining. "Ready to go?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I need food and I need sleep, and I need to not think about any of this for approximately 8 hours." "That's achievable." "And tomorrow," she said, "I need to know what happens to Conrad Reyes." "Already handled." She looked at him. "Handled how?" "He keeps his job, reduced access until trust is rebuilt, which is standard protocol. He made a mistake under pressure and then told the truth when he had the option not to." He paused. "That matters." She nodded slowly. "Good." They walked out of the building together. The night outside was cold and clear. The rain had finally stopped, the sky washed clean, the particular sharpness in the air that comes after a long stretch of weather breaks. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it. Across the street, Darius's car was gone. She didn't know where he was, didn't know exactly what awaited him at the end of whatever car ride he'd gotten into. She wasn't going to pretend she felt nothing about that. She'd spent 6 weeks in the dark because of the choices he'd made, and there was a version of her that was glad the accounting had come. But she wasn't going to perform satisfaction she didn't purely feel either. The world was not clean. It didn't go clean just because a particular wrong got addressed. She'd always known that. She just understood it differently now. Subquote. 2 weeks passed. She spent most of the first week at her own apartment, which Kellen's people had checked and cleared before she returned to it. She repainted the front room a slightly different shade of white than it had been. She couldn't have explained why, except that she needed the room to be different from the room she'd left when she walked out to go retrieve documents that didn't exist. She bought new coffee cups. She slept badly for the first 5 days and then, on the 6th, slept 10 hours straight and woke up feeling like herself in a way she hadn't fully expected to feel again. She went back to work at the start of the second week, not because she had to, because she'd thought about it carefully and made a decision, which was different from going back because it was expected or because staying away felt like letting something win. She'd thought about it the same way she thought about everything, systematically, from multiple angles, with the specific intellectual honesty that had always been her most useful quality, and sometimes her most inconvenient one. She wanted to go back. That was the honest conclusion. She wanted her office and her filing system and her work, and she wanted to walk through the door on the 14th floor and sit at her desk and manage the impossible schedule of a man who ran a complicated empire in a complicated world. She had never been naive about what that world contained. She had always understood the edges of it. The understanding was just more direct now. Kellen was in his office when she arrived. She knew this before she saw him because she knew his schedule and she'd rebuilt it in her head during the week she was away, tracking what needed to be rescheduled, what had probably slipped, what would require immediate attention. She sat at her desk and started working, and it felt, within about 20 minutes, like the most normal thing in the world, which was either recovery or delusion, she thought, and then decided the line between the two wasn't always the most important question. He came out of his office at 10 a.m., the way he always did when he needed something and had decided that calling through the wall was inefficient. He stopped when he saw her. "You're here," he said. "I sent you a message last night saying I'd be in." "I know, He stopped. "You're here." She looked at him. The man who had walked across a warehouse floor with that expression she'd spent weeks finding a word for. "Yes," she said. "I'm here." He stood in the doorway of his office for a moment longer than was typical. Then he said, "There's a call at 11 that I need you to coordinate. The Langford people have been rescheduled twice and they're starting to take it personally." "I know," she said. "I'm already on it." He nodded, started to turn back. "Kellen." He stopped. She'd been thinking about this conversation for a week. She'd drafted versions of it in her head the way she drafted complicated correspondence, considering the register, the precision, the specific words that would carry exactly what she meant, without carrying more or less than that. She'd landed on simple, which was usually where she landed when she thought hard enough about something. "Thank you," she said. "For coming." He looked at her. His hand was on the doorframe. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She held his gaze. "You didn't have to come yourself. You could have sent people. You came." A silence. "Of course I came," he said. It was quiet the way only genuinely simple statements were quiet. Not deflecting, not performing modesty, not offering an explanation or a qualification. Just the statement itself, carrying its own weight. She nodded. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." He held her gaze for a moment longer than he usually would have. Then he went back into his office. She turned back to her screen and pulled up the Langford file and started working through it. The office hummed around her, phones and footsteps and the low murmur of people in motion. The particular sound of a large organization operating at speed. She'd missed it more than she'd been willing to admit, even to herself. The full accounting of what Darius had done took 3 more months to complete. She heard pieces of it from Kellen, more pieces from Hargrove, some pieces she assembled herself from the financial documentation that passed through her office in the course of the investigation. The picture that emerged was something she'd suspected, but that was still, in its completeness, something that required a moment to absorb. Darius had known about Marcus's plan to steal and run for almost 4 months before it happened. He hadn't arranged it. Marcus had done that himself, had been doing it himself in small amounts for years before the large theft. But Darius had found out and made a calculation. He'd seen an opportunity in the theft rather than a problem. He'd let Marcus run and then used the chaos of the aftermath to do what he'd been positioning to do for 2 years, which was dismantle Kellen's credibility with the criminal organizations they had shared business relationships with and absorb the resulting vacuum. The money Darius had redirected, his share of what Marcus stole, the portion funneled to his accounts, was larger than the forensic summary had shown at the meeting. More than 14 million total, once the full trail was reconstructed. He had been more thorough than anyone had initially understood. The man with the dry voice and his 2 colleagues had, it appeared, already understood most of this before the meeting. They had come to the meeting not to discover information, but to confirm it and to remove Darius in a manner that had witnesses. The formality of the meeting had served their purposes. She thought about this sometimes, about the room she'd walked into and the multiple different sets of interests that had been operating in it simultaneously, each with their own information and their own objectives and their own version of what the night was supposed to produce. She'd been one piece of it, and Kellen had been one piece, and Darius had been the piece that all the other pieces had been positioned around. She thought about the man with the dry voice, and didn't ask questions about Darius's situation that she didn't need the answers to. There were edges to the world she worked in, and she'd always understood where she stood relative to them, and she'd always understood that understanding had limits by design. What she knew was that Darius Vallon did not reappear. Not in Portland, not in any business context that touched her world, not in any form that indicated he was operating in any capacity connected to his previous life. She filed that away and moved on. It was a Thursday in January, almost 3 months after the meeting, when things shifted again. Not dramatically, not with the sudden violence of the previous shifts, quietly, the way the most significant things sometimes happened, in a Tuesday afternoon moment that you didn't identify as significant until later, looking back. She was working late. The office was empty except for her, and she knew without checking Kellen in his office with the door partially open. This was their habitual late evening configuration, the building empty around them, the city lights beginning to matter through the windows, the particular silence of a large space after the people who filled it had gone. She knocked on his doorframe. He looked up from his desk. "I have the Meridian brief," she said, "and I want to talk about the restructuring plan for the Seattle holding." "Come in." She sat across from him and put the brief on the desk, and he reached for it, and they spent 30 minutes going through it the way they'd gone through hundreds of similar documents, her noting the issues, him asking the questions, both of them working through the logic until they had something that held up. At the end of it, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed the back of his neck, which was the specific gesture he made when a long day was reaching its natural end. "The Seattle plan," she said. "Tomorrow. The Harrington deadline is—" "I know when the deadline is." He looked at her with the expression that wasn't quite a smile. The one that appeared sometimes when she pushed back, when she refused to let the conversation end before she was ready to let it end. "Tomorrow morning. First thing." "Fine." She gathered the brief, stood up. "Elena." She stopped. He was looking at her with the expression she had finally, after 3 months, found a word for. Not one word, a phrase. It was the look of someone who had almost lost something and was still not over the almost. She knew the look because she'd caught the reflection of something similar in her own face in the early mornings, in the kitchen at 4 a.m. when the rain was on the glass and her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup, and she was thinking about a warehouse and a chain and a man who'd walked through a door. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city went about its business, indifferent and continuous, the way cities were. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I've been trying to figure out how to say it for about 3 months, which is—" He paused. "Which is not typical for me." "No," she said, "it's not." He looked at his hands on the desk, then at her. "When you were gone, the first week, I told myself it was operational, that finding you was a matter of containing a situation that had compromised my organization. I told myself that for about 4 days. He paused again. Then I stopped being able to tell myself that. She didn't speak. "What I felt when I found you in that warehouse," he said, "that wasn't operational. That wasn't about containing anything." He said it the way he said things he'd decided to say, directly, without softening, without checking to see how it was landing before he finished saying it. "I need you to know that." The office was very quiet. Outside, somewhere below, a car moved through an intersection and was gone. She looked at him. The man Portland feared, who had given her a choice every step of the way since the warehouse, who had come himself instead of sending people, who said, "Of course, I came," as if it were the simplest statement in the world. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. You went through something because of your proximity to my world. And I am not going to, Kellen." She said his name the way she said very few things, directly. "I know you're not asking for anything." "Then what are you— I'm telling you that I know," she said, "and that I've known for a while, and that I've been thinking about it." She held his gaze. "I don't make decisions under pressure. I make them when I've had time to think. I've had time to think." He was very still. "And?" She put her hands on his desk. Flat, the way she'd pressed them flat on the mattress at 4 a.m. when she was finding her bearings, the way she pressed them to her thighs when her hands shook. The gesture that meant, "I am here, in this moment, with full knowledge of where I am." "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid of the world outside this building. I'm not staying because you saved me and I feel I owe you something." She paused. "I'm staying because this is where I want to be. Because this work matters to me. Because you—" She stopped, found the honest version. "Because you are the most difficult, most complicated, most frequently infuriating person I've worked for in my professional life. And I have never once, in 3 years, felt like what I did didn't matter." She paused. "And because when I was in that warehouse and I was trying to hold on to the idea that someone was coming, the person I held on to was you." He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was doing the thing. His eyes were the steadiest thing in the room. "You're going to keep arguing with me," he said. "Constantly," she said. "It's one of my most important functions." Something happened in his face. The expression she'd spent months finding a word for shifted into something that didn't need a word. Something that was simply what it was, without category or qualification. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She didn't stand up. He didn't lean back. They stayed where they were for a moment that was quiet and unhurried and unperformed. Two people who had been through a storm that had reshaped the landscape and were sitting in what the landscape looked like afterward, getting their bearings. Then she picked up her brief. "The Seattle restructuring, tomorrow, first thing." "First thing," he said. She walked out. He watched her go. She didn't look back, but she heard him. The specific sound of him returning to his work, the shift of papers on his desk, the particular quiet that meant he was focused and present and in his element. She sat at her desk and pulled up her email and started drafting the Harrington correspondence. Outside, January was doing what January did. Cold and dark and indifferent. The city going on in its enormous, impersonal way. She'd been a part of this city for a long time. She knew its edges and its center and the particular quality of light it had at 8 p.m. in winter, when the rain had stopped and the streets were wet and everything reflected. She thought about the first morning after the warehouse, the way the rain had sounded against the window at Kellen's estate, the way she'd sat on the edge of a clean bed and pressed her hands flat and breathed through the fact that she was out, that it was over, that the floor was soft and the room smelled like clean linen. She thought about what she'd known then, which was that escaping a thing was not the same as it being over, that the hard part, not the physical part, not the danger part, but the interior part, was not done just because the chain was off your wrist. She looked at the mark on her wrist. 3 months out, and it was faint now, still visible in certain light, a pale difference in the skin's texture, the kind of mark that time was going to reduce further, but not entirely erase. She'd stopped minding it. It was the record of something she'd survived, and she had survived it. Not despite who she was, but because of it. Because she'd kept thinking when thinking was the only weapon available. Because she'd known her own work well enough to find the seams in what someone had tried to build on top of it. Because she'd walked into a room full of men who expected a frightened secretary and discovered something else entirely. She was not the same as she had been before the warehouse. She had thought about this carefully, the way she thought about everything. She tried to locate what had changed and what hadn't. Some things were the same. The systematic thinking, the drive for precision, the particular quality of her work ethic that had always been less about ambition than about the genuine satisfaction of doing something correctly. Those were the same. What was different was the absence of certain assumptions she'd carried without examining them. The assumption that proximity to danger was something that happened to other people. The assumption that competence was a shield in environments where other people controlled the variables. The assumption that doing your job well and doing it honestly meant you were protected by some implicit agreement that didn't actually exist. She understood now that the world didn't run on implicit agreements. It ran on explicit ones, and even those were only as good as the people making them. She understood that clearly, without bitterness, the way you understood things when you'd paid for the understanding with something real. What she'd done with that understanding was walk into a room and use it. She sent the Harrington email, pulled up the calendar for the next week, and started moving pieces to account for the Meridian Brief's timeline. The work organized itself around her the way it always had, the shape of it familiar and specific and requiring exactly the particular kind of attention she was built for. At 9:30, Kellen's light went off. She heard him come out. The particular sound of his footsteps. She'd know them anywhere now, would probably know them for the rest of her life, which was the specific legacy of paying very close attention to one person for a very long time. He stopped at her desk. "You should go home," he said. "10 minutes," she said. "You said that 40 minutes ago." "Then I mean it more sincerely this time." He was quiet. She kept working. He didn't leave. "I'll walk you out," he said. She saved the document she was working on, closed her laptop, gathered her things the way she gathered things, efficiently, without fuss, putting each item in its correct location in her bag. She stood up and looked at him. He was in his coat already, which meant he'd made the decision to wait for her before he'd even come to her desk, which was the kind of thing she filed quietly and with care. They rode the elevator down together. The building lobby was empty. The security desk manned by a guard who nodded at Kellen and glanced at Elena with the brief professional acknowledgement of someone who had been briefed on who she was. Outside, the January air was cold and clean. No rain. The streetlights turned the wet pavement to copper and gold. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around them. A couple walking a dog, a taxi navigating the intersection, the distant sound of the river that was always there beneath everything if you listened for it. "You know what I thought about," she said, "in the warehouse, besides the filing system." He looked at her. "I thought about this," she said. "Just the street. Just standing somewhere that wasn't a concrete floor. I made myself picture it in detail when things were very bad. The exact quality of the air, the sound of the city, the lights." She looked at the street in front of her. "It's exactly like I remembered." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good." She looked at him. The man who built an empire out of fear and had never once frightened her. The man who said, "Of course I came," and meant it as simply as it sounded. The man who understood, without her having to explain it, the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. "Good night, Kellen," she said. "Good night, Elena." She walked to her car. She didn't look back, but she heard him, still there on the sidewalk, not moving, with the patience of someone who was going to stay until she was safe and away, which was not something she'd asked for and not something she'd tell him to stop. She got in, pulled out of the parking space. At the end of the block, she stopped at a red light and looked in the rearview mirror. He was still there. She faced forward. The light changed. She drove. The city opened up around her, the bridges lit against the dark water, the West Hills thick with light, the specific geography of a place she had lived in long enough that it knew her back. She'd been afraid once, in a warehouse 14 miles from this intersection, that she would never see it again. She drove through it now and let it be ordinary, which was the most profound thing she knew how to do. The river went on below the bridges. The rain was done for now, and the stars were faint above the light-polluted sky. Portland went about its business, enormous and indifferent and full of the specific ordinary life of people moving through their evenings. Elena Voss drove home through the middle of it, and the night was quiet, and she was exactly where she had chosen to be.